Answers to life's questions? Then join me, Sarah Spiritual, every Wednesday evening from 5 to 8 p.m. for Spiritually Speaking with Sarah right here on 95.3 The Talk, WNN 1470 AM. See you there.
People are learning in a classroom how money is made from home at Online Trading Academy. Just how much?
$100, $200, $300. They were able to get to $500 a day in a little over 8 months. $500 a day, folks, is $10,000 a month.
Get classroom instruction on how money can be made from home and how risk is limited. Learn stocks, options, futures, forex. Learn step-by-step from professional traders at Online Trading Academy.
Everyone starts off very small baby steps. You know, if you can't average $100 a day, there's no way you're going to be able to make $300 a day or $3,000 a day in the markets.
Thousands have learned how money can be made from home with limited risk at Online Trading Academy. Attend a free half-day class to see how it works in Broward and Palm Beach. Online Trading Academy. Call now. 561-674-9800. 561-674-9800. That's 561-674-9800.
Talk health, talk wealth, talk politics, talk 1470 and 95.3 FM, WNN.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teele. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teele, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Solutions Info. I'm so glad that you could join us today. We have another awesome show for you. If you are listening to us on local South Florida radio, you can hear us at 1470 AM or 95.3 FM. Or you can actually watch us live stream at caregiversolutions.info. So no matter how you're joining us today, I'm happy that you are, because this show is for you, the family caregiver, and others that want to know more about caregiving. Maybe perhaps they're thinking they may end up being a caregiver one day, or perhaps they have a friend or a neighbor or a family member that is a caregiver, and they want to learn more about what they could do to help and understand the situation a little better. So this is a resource for you, and I'm so glad that you're taking advantage of it today. I have some sobering facts, however. The National Alzheimer's Association has recently released their latest statistics, and I want to go down that list and tell you what they are, because they're not good. More than 5 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's today. By the year 2050, the number could rise as high as 16 million. We're talking from 5 million to 16 million in a short amount of time. Every 66 seconds, someone in the United States develops Alzheimer's disease. Unbelievable. 15 million Americans provide unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's and other dementia. So this is somebody who's a spouse, an adult child, a friend, a neighbor. They're not a professional. They're not getting paid to do it. Usually people are in their home when they're being cared for by an unpaid caregiver. In the last year, these particular caregivers provided 18.2 billion hours of care at a cost of over $230 billion. In 2017, Alzheimer's and other dementias will cost the nation $259 billion. By 2050, costs could be $1.1 trillion. 35% of caregivers for people with Alzheimer's or other types of dementia report that their health has gotten worse, and that's no surprise. 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's or other dementia. It kills more people than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. Since the year 2000, deaths from Alzheimer's disease have increased by 89%. 1 in 10 people aged 65 and older have Alzheimer's, and 2/3 of them are women. Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States, and it cannot be prevented or cured at this time. Those are scary statistics. We are experiencing the tsunami of Alzheimer's disease, especially here in South Florida, but not just here, all across the United States, all across the world. Alzheimer's isn't, that selective when people are getting diagnosed. All ages, all types of ethnic groups, every country. It's rampant around the world. That's why we have World Alzheimer's Day, which will be coming up soon. So what do we do? And what's going to happen? And think about all the people that are caregivers who are losing their health and getting stressed out and overwhelmed, and they just can't do it. There's a doctor, a neurologist here in South Florida, says it takes a village to take care of an Alzheimer's patient. One person cannot do it by themselves without suffering from mental, emotional, and physical stress and breakdown. So that's going to lead us to need to get help. And where's the help going to come from? Certainly friends and family can help, but sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes we can get respite care for a loved one in a daycare center, but sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes people can get home health coming into their home, but sometimes that's not a desirable option, and even that's not enough unless it's 24/7, and then the cost can be so terribly high that you can't afford it, and there's pros and cons with that too. So today's talk is going to be actually concentrated on options for people, where they can go to get help into assisted living facilities, memory care communities. And I have an expert in the studio with me today that's going to discuss with me those options and how somebody would go about looking for help, the best kind of help, the best place for help when those other options aren't working anymore. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you today Sharon Agate from Right from the Heart. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Marcia. It's so great to be back on your show again.
Yeah, it's been over a year.
It has.
And you were so popular. You got some calls after the show last time, and people heard you and liked what you had to say. So I thought about a year more was plenty time enough to wait to have you come back. You are the owner of Right from the Heart, which is a senior placement company.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the first thing that I want you to explain is, what is a senior placement company? Because certainly people could go out on their own and search for a place. With all of these new assisted livings that we're experiencing, starting breaking ground here in South Florida. It seems like every day you hear about another one coming, to light that will be in construction and soon be built to provide services for people, not just for assisted living, but for memory care too. So you place people in not only assisted living and memory care, sometimes even in independent living, right? And what does that mean? Explain, what does it mean when we say you place or you are a senior placement specialist? What does that mean?
What that means is I step in at a time where sometimes there's a couple of things I'd like to discuss. We are seeing, as you were talking about the statistics, we are a population here in the United States which is growing, and as baby boomers retire, there's going to be a significant growth in the amount of senior living communities out there with a wide array of choices and lots of variables that go into the decision-making process. So just in terms of the numbers and statistics, there will be that. It's already happening. And also what I do as senior placement, my role as I define it is to go in to be a support system for the family as well as the senior. And I think usually when I'm called in, some people start very early in the process and are very proactive, but oftentimes an event happens, a life-changing event. Maybe they had a couple of falls, they fractured their hip, or maybe they had a stroke, or maybe they have Alzheimer's disease, or maybe they wandered off. There's changes that are occurring in the course of any orthopedic or neurological condition that can warrant a change in life. And at a time when you're in the midst of dealing with a very emotional and very stressful life-changing event for your family member or friend or you as a caregiver, you are then faced with an overwhelming amount of choices, and to look at every community is really, it's not in the best interest of everyone involved.
Well, let's talk about that, because I hear from caregivers all the time, I don't know where to start. It's so overwhelming. Some people say, well, here's a book that lists every assisted living from A to Z in the whole county.
Right.
Go for it. It's crazy, really, because a lot of people waste their time, I think, calling these places that aren't appropriate. And
Exactly.
it's so, it's such a process. And a lot of caregivers, I would say almost all of them, don't have time to go from A to Z and call all of these places, even just cold calling on the telephone, because trying to narrow it down. I think that they're overwhelmed with everything else, and then adding this extra burden on top of them, even though we encourage people to plan ahead and go and find places that maybe you don't need it now. Maybe you don't need it next month or in 6 months, but maybe within the next year or so. I think that's a good time to start looking at places.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, even if you had a year to go from A to Z, here at least in South Florida, to look at all these places, I'm not sure you'd be finished by the time a year is up. Now, other places, of course, that are more rural, maybe they don't have as many, but here in South Florida, we're just like, snowed with not only people that are getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, like all the time, like you said, the baby boomers, they're getting older. So that's the wave that's coming. We're in the midst of it now.
Well, I think for everything we do in life, we want to make well-educated, well-informed decisions. And I think it starts with selecting an expert to work with you in the decision-making process. So the first thing I always advise people to do is, it's not enough to cold call all these communities and just get some general information. You not only want to save time, but you want to know what are the questions that I need to ask for my mom and my dad.
Yes, that's very, very important, because not every place is the perfect fit for every person. And I think the biggest thing that people need to know is, how do I know what's the best place for my loved one, for my spouse, my mom, my grandma? Where's the best place? And it's a very, very time-consuming exercise in looking for that. So when we come back from our first commercial break, Sharon's going to share with us the things that you should look for, what questions you need to ask. This is going to be a very educational opportunity for you as you're planning your caregiving journey for your loved one. And we will be right back, so stay tuned.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Being unable to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's.
Or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
And we are back, and my guest today is Sharon Agate. She is the owner of Right from the Heart Senior Placement. Sharon is a senior placement specialist, and I'm so glad you're here today, Sharon, to talk about this. It's very, very important because you are local to South Florida community here in Palm Beach, Broward area, and there are differences, I would imagine, between senior placement organizations or companies.
Mm-hmm.
Are there a lot of them out there, first of all, and how did it get started and why did it get started?
I think it started with the national companies that a lot of people may be familiar with, that you see advertised on television quite frequently. And what it is basically, how it started is people would call in, they would do an initial intake about your parent or your relative situation, and then they would give them a directory of places in their area that could serve the needs of their family member.
Okay, so these are companies that are located someplace in the United States, throughout the country, but they're not in your town, but they know about things in your town.
Right. Well, that's the whole problem, because they're not always in your area. They may know the general geographic area, but they're not going to the communities on a regular basis. So communities change over time. They may add or delete services. Problems may occur. Changes may occur, and they're no longer providing what they used to provide, or maybe providing additional services. But in either case, they are not going in and out of the communities and staying on top of what's occurring.
So they may not have the latest information, and
Correct.
they also don't have, it sounds like, a personal relationship with the particular community that they might send you to.
Exactly.
Or offer for you to go visit.
Right. So they're just like a blanket organization. If you do live in a rural area and you go online and you cannot find a placement specialist or placement consultant that will meet with you one-on-one, then that could be a valuable resource in that area. But I think that we're seeing, along with the rise in the number of senior communities, there's a rise in the number of people coming into this profession in this particular market niche because of the rising need for assistance in making this decision. This is a life-changing this is a life-changing event. This is something, it's a major decision for your family member. We want to make it well-informed. We want it to be personalized. We want a lot of things to go into that decision, and we can go through that in the process. But we want to make sure that we're making a move, because moves are traumatic. And we want to make sure we're making the best choice and the best possible way. And a lot of families are living out of state or may not be available locally to do this time-consuming research. So that's why there's specialists like myself who have worked for many years in senior living communities, and before that in clinical settings, in hospitals and rehab centers, that have the knowledge, that have the expertise, that have that wealth of information, and that also have that all-important component, compassion.
Well, that's really good, because people need that expertise of someone. And, you know, if it's all left up to them to go do the legwork, so to speak, once they get a recommendation, if they call a national company who just gives them pretty much a list, it can still be hard, because, you know, a lay person who doesn't understand what's going on with their loved one and what kind of services may even be offered may not understand what questions to ask and what that person really needs. So it sounds like people that are local in the community, as a senior placement company local, you can actually give them more detailed information and help them actually through this whole process. But are all senior placement specialists that are in the community, are they all about the same, or how do you know which one to pick? Because I'm sure, like you said, they're growing, there's many out there, but how do you know how to pick one? And would there be certain criteria that you should ask in order to make that choice?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because there is a growing number of people coming into this field that may or may not have the special education, training, and work experience that is necessary before you can even begin to counsel families and seniors. So they may be referred to as senior placement specialists or senior placement counselors, but I think it's important for family members to take the time and interview the consultant before they choose one. You know, maybe a family member, a friend, a relative, maybe a doctor, maybe an attorney. Somebody may have referred you to a particular organization. And I say that it's always best to talk to 2 or 3 to make sure, one, that you have that comfort level. But I think you need to interview them. You want to know what their background is, what their credentials are, unfortunately, because this is a new area, this is a new niche in senior living, not everybody has the same credentials.
So it's not really regulated or licensed at this point?
At this point, it's not. And I think we're going in that direction. And I'm happy to say we're going in the direction. On my website, I have a series of questions that I think every consumer can look at and ask when they're interviewing someone. So, for example, you can ask them, have you worked in a senior living community before? Do you know on a day-to-day basis the operations? Do you know what to look for before I take someone to a community? I go in and I evaluate that community, because I've worked in one and I know what to look for. I know how to evaluate it. If somebody's coming from another field and doesn't have that background, how are they going to know what to look for? And I want my families to be able to, I want to arm them with the right questions to ask when we're touring as it pertains to their individual situation. Because seniors, like everyone, is an individual. It's not a cookie cutter approach.
Right.
You really have to individualize it to that person. And I think the most important thing is, before you even start that search, during that interviewing process, not only do you want to know their background and credentials and ask them things, what's your education? What's your work experience? Have you worked in a clinical setting? In what capacity have you worked with seniors and their families? Have you counseled seniors over the years? So I really get into that.
And how much do you know about dementia? That should be a big one too.
A very big one too, is have they done their research? Do they know, as you're reporting today about the statistics, are they staying on top of the trends? Do they know the different forms of dementia? Many times families will use the term Alzheimer's interchangeably with dementia and not know that Alzheimer's is the most prevalent form of dementia. You can have dementia. A lot of things we're seeing is early onset. Sometimes it's frontotemporal dementia. Somebody has a stroke, it's a vascular dementia. But until you really know the questions to ask, and how are you going to be able to educate families if you don't have the background, the knowledge, and the experience to do so?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I know of a lot of people who unfortunately placed a loved one that had dementia in a regular assisted living, and when they were being interviewed either by the assisted living, and maybe they had a placement person or not, I'm not sure, but in any case, no one even asked about the person, about if they had memory problems or some of the in-depth questions that you would want to find out about an older person, because if you don't know the details about a person's life and their characteristics and their personality and their tendencies and their day-to-day habits, how are you going to know if a place is the right place for them? And so unfortunately, I have heard of a lot of people being placed in a regular assisted living, all right, wrongly, because they did have dementia. And unfortunately, down the road, these were people that could walk out, that walked out the door. It wasn't secure. They got lost. They got into trouble. It's a horrible situation. So it's very, very important, to, like you said, to know what you're dealing with. Ask the right questions, because if you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get the right answers that you need in order to make the decision.
And you know what? Before we even set foot into any community, we're going to talk about that. And if we're talking about dementia, and I know this is especially hard for families and especially for adult children to hear the word, my parent has Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
They've been diagnosed. And it's almost a natural coping mechanism to first deny it and make excuses for it and say, oh, she's just forgetful, that's all. And it could be normal age-related forgetfulness, but it also could be something more. So when, as part of my evaluation, if I find out they've not been to a neurologist, and we start talking about behaviors, and often it's more than just forgetfulness or repetitiveness. We're talking about behaviors like all of a sudden, you know what, Mom gets easily agitated, and I find in the evening they're getting more and more confused. And I don't know why, but during the day, they constantly talk about wanting to go back home where they are in their own home, because sometimes their reality is shifting now to the past. So we explore and understand where they are in that journey. Are they in the beginning of the journey? Are they just forgetful? Are they just having some memory loss? But there's so much help and so much resources, which is why I love your show, Marcia. You bring in the specialists from outside, the most knowledgeable people who are going to evaluate. And you and I have trusted advisors because sometimes a doctor will say to you, yeah, mom's forgetful, here's some Aricept, but they have to go the next step and say, let's go to a neurologist. And we know there's so many centers here that specialize in all the research and all that's available and all the information. Plus, they have resources for the family. A lot of times we think it's just about the person with Alzheimer's, but all of us, especially your caregivers, no, it's much more than that. It's about the family.
Yeah, and that's one reason why I wanted to have you back, because in the time that I have seen you here on the program, again, heard about people that were misplaced in the wrong community. And a lot of communities that might be regular assisted living say, well, he's got a little forgetfulness, but he's okay in regular, but not understanding the full picture, how that person's going to actually integrate and transition, and if they can, and then watching them throughout this process to see if that is the right placement and pick up on something before a tragedy happens. So you want to be able to make the right placement at the right time, which is so, so important. So thank you for explaining that. So we have local senior placement counselors, and we have ones that are off-site that you can contact on the internet or by an 800 number, right?
Right.
So there's choices there. But we kind of talked about the best choices would be the ones that might be local because there's more of a personal interaction. And then interviewing those local people, I say it's like getting a second or third opinion because you want to interview them, like Sharon said, and ask the right questions to see if that's the person who's going to be the best equipped to help you and your loved one find success in placing, going from home to a community setting. And you want to be successful, and that's the whole idea of that.
Right.
So that's really important. So great tips right there, and which we're going to give your website out at the end of the show so you all can go on and look at those list of questions that Sharon was referring to. So we're going to cut to a commercial break. We'll be right back.
Are you a senior? Do you need help in your
The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know. We understand. We can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Being unable to recognize
How can a senior placement specialist help untangle all the different choices and help someone to narrow down their options and the best options, which is very important. So Sharon's talking about interviewing senior placement specialists. They're not all alike. They don't all have the same experience. They all don't have the same knowledge. And they also all don't have the same motive. So you want to make sure that you get the right person that's going to help you. And so now, Sharon, that we've talked about that, let's say that someone has done all of that and they say, okay, this is my situation. You're going to help me find a place for my wife. And what would be the best expectations? Because again, we're educating families so that they know what they should expect. This way, if they're not getting what they should get, then they're going to know that maybe this might not be the right person to help them. So let's talk about expectations and what a person should be expecting when they hire. Well, they don't really hire you, do they? I guess
they choose.
They choose
They make
you.
a choice.
They choose you. They don't hire you because we get into that in a minute. But I know your cost to a caregiver to help them is
It's complimentary. There is no cost.
0. So they don't really hire you because there's no money exchange that go between senior placement counselor specialist and the end client. But they're choosing someone to help them, and they want to make the right choice. So once they choose someone, and I would recommend you, of course, because I know you do an awesome job, but what would the family expect? Walk us down the timeline there.
The first thing that I do when I speak to a family over the phone, I do a brief set of questions depending on the circumstances. But the most important thing I do is set an appointment to meet with the family and to meet with the senior. Sometimes they're in a hospital or in a rehab setting. Sometimes they're in their own home. But I always go to where they are. It's really important for me, and I think for any specialist who wants to help a family, is to really get to know the senior because it's their life and their decision. There are times, as in the case of dementia, where someone may not be able to make a decision anymore, which is why it's also important, if you do have a diagnosis of dementia, is to know what your parents want down the road, what is important to them, so that when you're faced with making that decision, so many times family members say, I want to do the right thing. I'm not sure what my mom or dad would want. And so you have to do a checkup with seniors all of the time because cognitive changes occur and they may not be able to express to you what's important. I'm about empowering the family, but also empowering the senior. So the first thing I do is a complete home assessment. And the reason I do that is, one, I want the senior to feel comfortable. We talk a lot about some issues that can be very delicate and difficult to discuss. Sometimes the family members may not be in agreement on the path forward. So before we even set foot on our search, I want to bring everyone together in the family because some people may say, you know what, I want to go the home health route. And other members of the family will say, I think senior living is the best way to go. So I want to make sure we discuss the pros and cons of every option, and I want to facilitate the decision-making process, not make the decision, but help them weigh the pros and cons. But first, in order for me to do that, I have to meet the family. I have to know where everyone stands because sometimes, especially during a crisis, you want to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
So, and I think seniors are more likely, they are better than anyone in our population at, like with x-ray vision, they can tell if you're genuine or not, if you care a lot. Maya Angelou said, people want to know how much you care before they care about how much you know. So compassion is really at the heart of it. So if the person is compassionate, if you feel, is that when you choose someone, you want to say, do I feel that person is going to be able to understand and relate to my mom, my dad, my uncle, my brother, my friend? You want to make sure that they're going to build a sense of a bond of trust, not just with the family, but with the senior.
Yeah, because this is not just an everyday decision that people go through, and it's a big deal. And, it's like choosing a doctor or a lawyer. You really got to do your homework, and you really want to see if there's a rapport between the professional helping in your particular situation. So, so a good senior placement counselor would do a visit with the family and the senior.
In person. That's why it's harder for the national companies. You can do an intake on the phone, but until you meet the person, I want to see what their home is like. I want to know their lifestyle. Are they somebody?
Why is that important to know what their home looks like?
There's a community for every kind of personality. So there are people who love the home and heart, the warm feeling of a home-like setting. Arden Courts is a perfect example. That's a home-like setting. Some people, however, are used to a country club lifestyle. They want to be in a large community where there's lots of people and continue their lifestyle. And my ultimate goal is in helping them find the right community. I want to recreate their lifestyle that they enjoyed at home in a setting where they're going to get the supportive services that they need.
That makes sense. You don't want to upset their apple cart just because now they're needing more services as people age, going into assisted living, and then, of course, memory care. And we're talking about, assisted living and memory care here. And again, what Sharon's talking about is finding the right place for the person. So whatever she's talking about, you're including general assisted living as well as memory care, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So now you meet with the family, you find out what they're like, you find out what their lifestyle is. You want to sort of kind of keep that on the same path because that's going to make them feel comfortable. What else? Anything else that someone would expect?
Well, from all the information that I've gathered, I come up with a short list of the communities that I think will best meet their needs. And once again, this isn't cookie cutter. This is understanding a lot of variables, what their particular health situation is, not just the present health, but what other health conditions they may have that might impair their independence and how is it impairing their independence. Once we go through the medical component of it, too, is we look at price. We have to work within a budget. We always talk about veterans benefits and getting the word out because a lot of our seniors are veterans and they're entitled to a very large benefit, or if they're a spouse of a veteran or even a widow of a veteran, they can qualify most times for these benefits. Of course, there's Medicaid as well. So there's a lot of financial sources out there. And I have a network of trusted advisors that I worked with for many, many years in the industry. Because before I refer a family, I'm like a mother hen, Marcia. Before I refer someone to an elder law attorney, it's my reputation, and I go to the best in the field in each area.
So you're actually breaking down the process for a family and literally, probably as well as figuratively, holding their hand and walking them through step by step to reduce the stress and to make it less overwhelming and know what they should expect as they go along this pathway.
So I talked to them about the communities that I will be recommending for us to visit and why.
You said us. You said recommending us to visit. That means you go too.
I go with them.
Does every senior placement person go with them?
No. Oftentimes they're said, why don't you check out these communities? Well, the key thing to me and why I'm there, besides being support, the key thing to me is communication.
Yes.
And when you're sitting down with the marketing representative of a community, you have the knowledge. I have the knowledge of this family's specific situation. I send that information to the community representative, but there are specific questions I want the family to ask and have
That's their
answer.
Chance right there, while they're there.
And I tell them what to look for when we tour. I'm saying, this is what I want you to observe during the tour. These are the questions that are really important to your situation. So they're coming prepared to do, they're not just getting a tour, they're getting a wealth of information from the community. And oftentimes a family member may forget or not ask a question, or maybe the conversation goes in a direction where, there's a specific thing we need to address here, and I want it on the table. I think full disclosure is what we're about.
So I have a question for you. So you said you narrowed down the list from all the options, but do you consider all the options before you narrow down the list, or are there other placement companies out there that might have their favorites and may not include all the options that would be a good option? How do you know that they're offering you all of the properties that should be considered?
I think you have to be very direct and ask them, are there certain communities that you're working with, or are you working with all of the communities? And ask them right out. I know you probably have some that you've gone to many times because you've received great family feedback, but you know what? That community may be great for one person, but not for another. So
And why is it important to ask those questions? Because we said your service is free. So why is it important to ask those questions? Is there any kind of reason why people would not maybe refer you to a certain community, even though it might be one that you should see?
Absolutely, that can happen. Most of the senior living communities, the way that I get compensated is through, I get paid by the community that the person decides to move to, the family decides to move to. But sometimes I say, you know what, this community is really great for their needs. And that community may choose to not have a placement specialist or work with them. But if I know that it's the right fit, I'm going to bring the family to the community because it's the right thing to do. And that's what Right from the Heart is about. It's doing what's right, and it's coming from your heart.
It's good to bring that to light, just because whether you're getting recommendations from someone online or whether you're getting recommendations from someone locally, you want to be sure that they're including all the proper communities that you should be looking at, and if not, why not?
Exactly.
And you might want to ask those questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know what? I never tell the family that, gee, this is a community that doesn't contract with me. They never know that.
Okay.
If it's the right choice, we go there. And you know what? I've been doing this so long, and that I've learned that it has to be genuine. It has to be right. And I've brought people, and I've moved in several people to communities like Arden Courts that does not have that policy to work with senior placement. But I have good relationships with all the communities, and I frequent all of the ones.
Great. That's great information. Well, we're going to take our last quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
Do you need the advice of an elder law attorney? Perhaps you...
The obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know, we understand, we can help. Don't let guilt keep you from making the right decision. Visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Somewhere at the corner of bewildered and confused is a lost mother, a father, a sibling, a grandparent. Wandering is a common symptom of Alzheimer's or related dementias and can often make those who care for a loved one feel just as lost. If you're looking for a place that's safe and secure, look to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines.
Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. My guest is Sharon Agate. She is a senior placement specialist. Her company is called Right from the Heart. And she's been doing this many, many years. And she's got great experience. And she's a great person because her feelings, her compassion, and her help that she gives families does come right from the heart, and therefore
Thank you, Marcia.
your name. So before we end our segment today, Sharon, thank you for everything that you've shared with us. This is great information. However, Arden Courts is a memory care community, and we will offer trial stays for families so that they can be sure that they have peace of mind and everything is working out and they've picked the right place for their loved one, so that they don't have to worry about not choosing the right place, because they can have a trial stay, which at the end of 30 days or so, then they have more options depending on what they want to do. However, not all memory care or assisted living communities make that choice. So my question is, if someone moves into an assisted living or a memory care assisted living and they found it on their own, or they were recommended to that community by a senior placement company, but it's not working out. It's not what they thought. It's not, they're not happy with the services. Do they have recourse?
They do. In the state of Florida, in any assisted living, an individual can give 30 days notice for any reason to end a contract. But most of the senior living communities also have an entrance fee. And that's something that is lost up front and is not refundable. But yes, they can, after 30 days, can give notice for any time. So it's not a long-term contract they're signing, but the important thing is that they do it right the first time.
Right, because the first time, then you're going to not have to forfeit that move-in fee or that community fee, whatever it might be called. And that's, again, why Arden Courts does the trial stays, as you know, because we're not going to want to keep someone's move-in fee or community fee, we call it a move-in fee, if it's not the right place. So with this trial stay, if it's not working out, if there are issues that can't, be resolved, which are usually very few and far between, but however, if families just change their mind at the end of a 30-day trial stay and they don't stay during that time, then they get refunded that move-in fee. So we're very different that way, but we're talking about all assisted livings in general. There may be a lot of people listening to us that aren't close to an Arden Courts who can't take advantage of that opportunity. So they need to know what their options are. So you can give a notice and then move into another community once your 30 days is up.
And that's precisely why somebody should use a placement specialist.
To make sure they get it right.
Because they really want to make sure they cover all their bases. There may have been a lack, going back to that communication. I say to families, you know what? Do you feel comfortable when your mom's evaluated by their nurse? Do you think you can have a rapport with that nurse, an open, ongoing conversation? Because really, that's who you're going to be dealing with from now on regarding their care.
Right.
Do you feel there's an open door policy to speak to the executive director or any member or manager of any department? Communication's important, and it's an ongoing process that doesn't end. My role doesn't end after someone moves into a community. I want to make sure they're happy, and I follow up with the families, and I follow up with the seniors with a visit. And from time to time, they'll call me and they'll say, you know what, Sharon, this has come up. How should we handle it? And because of my experience in working communities, I help them address it. And a lot of times, unfortunately, I get referrals from people who actually moved to a community and call me and say, I moved in and we thought it was going to be great. And 3 months later, they told us their level of care, they really got it wrong on the initial evaluation. It's going to be an additional $400 a month. I don't want that to happen to my families that I work with. That should never happen to anyone.
Get it right the first time.
I want them to ask all the questions, and if they have the knowledge and they have the information, then there aren't those surprises.
Yeah, no surprises would be a good thing. So if someone wanted to research this a little bit more, find out about what questions to ask, I know you have a great website that you have all of this listed on there in case they couldn't jot it all down while they were listening to us. Can you go ahead and share that with everybody and how they would get that, and then how they might be able to contact you directly?
Absolutely. The way you can contact me directly, my phone is 561-374-4696. That's my cell. That's the best way to reach me. In addition, you can go right to my website, right from the heart, seniorplacement.com. You'll get a list of questions to ask when you are interviewing senior placement consultants, and you will get a wealth of information on programs that we discuss, financial, like veterans benefits, government aids, and such as Medicaid. You'll get all the knowledge and information you need to begin your search. And that, I think, will give them the guidance to help them start the process. And the one very important thing I want to say is, even if your parents or your relatives or family member is in excellent health, there's so many things we need to do up front and keep on top of, and I want to discuss that real briefly, is go to your elder law attorney. Make sure, especially in the case of dementia, do you have a power of attorney? Who's the healthcare surrogate?
Yep.
Do you know, my parents were very private about what their resources were financially. Get a handle on what their income is, what their assets are.
And I think that's important, because not only do you help people find the right place at the right time for the right person, but you're also giving them this advice about getting their documents, having them in order, which we talk about all the time on the program. You can't be too prepared. So I want to thank you again for sharing and being here. It was wonderful, and all of that great information. And I want to thank you, our watchers and our listeners, for joining us today on the Caregiver Solution Info Show. We will be back same time, same place next week. I hope you join us then. In the meantime, don't forget, give somebody a hug, because they need it, and so do you. And so don't forget also, call Art and Courts for that free book, 888-478-2410. And we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions.
The opinions expressed on the preceding